Thank you. So, yeah, I'm David Farrell. I work at ZipRecruiter, and I also run pearltricks.com, which looks like this. So this is What's New on CPAN Annual Edition. Every month on Pearltricks, I post a blog post called What's New on CPAN, and it's a curated list of new distributions uploaded to CPAN in the previous month. And the key criteria is they must be brand new. So new versions of existing modules don't count. So for this talk, what I've done is taken a look at the uploads for the last 12 months or so, and pulled out some highlights and some curiosities. And I'm hoping that you'll come away from this talk inspired to try something new. I should say that I have 30 minutes of material that I can cram into a 20-minute slot. So I'm going to go quite fast, but I promise to share these slides on pearltricks.com if you want to go back for reference later. All right, so APIs and apps, this is the first category. This is a really popular category. We get hundreds of uploads in this space all the time. Here are some examples, social media, working with Google Maps, Medium, blogging, Fitbit. I want to talk about one in particular, Mastodon Client. Mastodon is a really interesting technology. It is a Twitter clone, open source, but it's a distributed network. And you can use Mastodon Client to connect to Mastodon servers and post status updates just like you would tweet on Twitter. That's pretty cool, I think. In the past year, the Let's Encrypt folks and the Acme protocol has been a really big movement. And that's a service where you can generate SSL certificates for free. And we've seen a proportional response in CPAN uploads. So if you want to work with that service, NetAcme looks like a good module for doing that. And also Mojo Acme looks promising too. So if you're interested in Let's Encrypt, check those out. Google Cloud Speech is a module that works with Google's audio transcription service, which is really cool. And you use it like this. You construct a new speech object, you pass your secret file and a file path to the audio that you want to transcribe, and you call the sync recognize method, and you get an operation object whose results method returns an array ref of the transcribed text. It also has an async recognize method. So if you want to kick off the processing, do something else, and then get the results later, you can do that too. OpenALPR stands for Automatic License Plate Recognition. This is a really big GitHub project. I think it's written in C or C++. Image OpenALPR lets you use it with Perl. So let's say you have a picture like this, and you want to extract the license plates from this image. Okay? You import the module, call the new constructor method, and it takes either US or EU as a string, so it recognizes those license plates only at the moment. And then you call the recognize method, which is recognized with an S. So if you're British like me, you're comfortable with that, but you should be aware that it's not spelled with a Z. And you pass the file path that you want to scan, and and you get back an array of license plates that is extracted from the image. All right, next category, config and DevOps. So as you may know, the Alien namespace is a collection of modules that lets you install third-party libraries with the CPAN toolchain and also declare dependencies on third-party libraries from Perl code. It's really cool. Graham Ollis has done a huge amount of work in this area, curating the names, the existing modules, uploading new ones. It's really great, and these are all examples of new Alien modules that you can use today. An alternative to the Alien system is CPAN plugin sysdebs. This is really cool. Okay, so do you remember the CPAN client that we all stopped using when CPAN N came out? Well, it has a plugin system. So if you start CPAN and you push the CPAN plugin syssteps string to the plugin list and then commit that change, CPAN will then run this code before it installs any module. So let's say I want to install Imager, which has a number of third-party dependencies. Well, with this plugin, it will run my local package manager to install the packages rather than having Perl build them itself. And so in this case, I'm running it on a Red Hat instance, so it calls yum and prompts for the sudo prompts for the password, just like it would with a normal package manager install. And it runs through that whole process, and then it continues with the regular makefile installation that CPAN would do normally. This runs on flavors of BSD, Linuxes, Mac OS with Homebrew, and Windows with Chocolatey. So it's pretty cool. One caveat is that in order to work, it has a mapping file of modules to external dependencies, right? So if the module that you want to install isn't in that mapping file, it won't work. So if you release a module to CPAN that has external dependencies, send the author a pull request, and then it will be installable via this method. Perl runs on loads of different operating systems, but often they store their basic information in different places. So you can use system info to query hosts with a uniform interface to get basic information like that shown on the screen. This also runs on Windows, Mac OS, Linuxes, and BSDs too. Redis rate limit kind of does what it says on the tin. If you have a web service and you want to rate limit it either for protecting the resource or metering purposes, you can use this module to get a sliding window based rate limiting algorithm backed by Redis. TextXSlate is a high-performance templating library. DataXSlate takes the same underlying technology and applies it to Perl data, basically. And this is how it works. So you construct an XSlate object, and you call the render method. And render takes what looks like a hashref here. But if you look closely, you can embed template variables into the data structures. So this is probably a better alternative than just straight up hash refs. If you have like huge hash refs for different environments, maybe like dev, staging, production, I think this is a really cool idea. Okay, CloudCron is a tool released by Jose Luis Martinez, who's behind the Pause distribution. And basically, it's a cron distributed system for the cloud. And I don't fully understand how it works, but basically it will take a cron file, break it up into cloud events, and then distribute them via S3. Okay, data category. FuseBead from ping. Don't use this module. Use the GitHub repo instead, because the script file that you need to run is on the repo in GitHub, but it's not on CPAN yet. But what does it do, right? Well, let's say you have a ping like this. You can use FuseBead from ping to create a blueprint to create a FuseBead collage that matches the ping that you put in the first place. I think it's really cool. Spreadsheet generate XLSX. What I like about this module is how simple it is. You just import the module, declare your data, and call the generate XLSX function, and it will print that data to a spreadsheet. Simple. Left pad. So you might remember the Node.js controversy last year. Left pad was a library that did very little, but had a huge amount of downstream dependencies. So someone uploaded left pad to CPAN, and this is some advanced trolling game here. I want you to note the abstract, which says, why should Node.js have all the fun? And it has an explicit stability policy, which reads, So that people may depend on this module for their production code, the author commits to never deleting it from CPAN. And I also like to point out that it's version 3, so you can be sure all the bugs have been worked out by now. All right, so YAML has been somewhat neglected on CPAN of late. I don't think our best module is even up to the latest YAML spec. YAML PP is an effort started by Tina Muller to basically reset and try to bring us up to code. And I saw Ingy.net blogging about collaborating with Tina recently too, so that looks like a promising space. Speaking of formats that are difficult to parse, has anybody read the PDF reference? I see a few hands. Yeah, I looked this up. It's 11 years old. This is the latest version, and it's really long. 1,310 pages long. I haven't read it. Most of you haven't read it. You don't have to, because we have PDF Tiny. PDF Tiny implements an intentional subset of the PDF standard to do practical things like text extraction, splitting pages, updating subtitles, that kind of thing. It has one other feature which has extremely low memory footprint. So if you want to run it on a server with constrained resources, this could be a really good option. JSON schema shorthand, this generates JSON data that is, this implements a DSL which lets you create JSON schemas in shorthand rather than using the JSON schema syntax, which can be verbose at times. JSON schema to JSON creates sample data that is compliant with the JSON schema, which is really useful for testing. And my favorite new JSON addition, JSON typist. If you've ever decoded a JSON data structure into Perl and found some of the integers have been stringified and some not, well, JSON typist implements a method to fix that for you. So I think that's handy. Perl I/O via JSON. I was so excited when I saw this name. I thought, yes, implement JSON encode decode at the I/O layer, right? And you can just print one object per line, something like that. That's not exactly what this module does. It assumes that the file is always encoded in XML. So as long as you're going from JSON to XML, this is a really good module. Other than that, I don't know. I think it's a missed opportunity. All right. These are 3 modules that are all kind of pipeline themed, and they basically do data transformation. They all look good. I haven't used any of them, but if you need to do data transformation, these look like promising additions. So if you can't add a new feature, you can always go faster, right? Sort hash keys is really cool. It implements a hash key sort, which is 50% faster than Perl's native hash sort. URI access escape does percent encoding decoding, and it is 34 times faster than the venerable URI escape module, right? All right, next category, development and version control. So MCE's been around for a couple of years. It's a module for doing massively parallelizable data processing tasks in Perl. It's really great. New this year, MCE Hobo, which implements a threads-like interface for doing the same thing. MCE Shared lets you share data between MCE workers and threads. Okay, can anyone see what's wrong with this code? Right, because return has a higher precedence than or, so the code will never die. For situations like this, I recommend Perl critic policy built-in functions prohibit return or, and it will catch that. What about this code? Yeah? Yes. So try tiny requires a closing semicolon at the end of a catch block. So for this, I recommend Perl critic policy try tiny require block termination, and you'll catch those errors. And that's really useful because sometimes if you miss a semicolon, Perl won't throw an exception. And if it does throw an exception, the error message printed has nothing to do with a missing semicolon. So it can be really hard to track down that error if you have it. But the real question is, why are you using try tiny when there is, 5 minutes, okay. Syntax keyword try. This is an alternative to try tiny, which implements the try catch syntax with real blocks that you can return from, and it runs really fast. But sometimes you do have to use try tiny, like you depend on code which uses try tiny, for instance. And in those situations, I recommend try tiny tiny. And what this does is it loads a patched version of try tiny, which is optimized to run a lot faster. Okay, params validation compiler. Dave Rolski mentioned this in his lightning talk yesterday. I think it's really cool for 2 reasons. One, it uses Moose or type standard, type tiny types. And 2, it compiles the validation routine down that you can reuse over and over again. So it's very fast, right? So in this example, I've got a subroutine called bar. I prepare a validator code ref, and then whenever the subroutine is called, I can execute the code ref on the arguments, and if it fails, it prints out really useful exception messages, like this required oh, actually, I think I have a slide for this. Okay, here's an example of calling bar. So this passes because ID is a required parameter. This passes because it accepts hash refs or hashes. You don't have to worry about that. This passes passing the name parameter, which is optional. This fails, and it prints out a wrong type exception message explaining exactly what's wrong. And if a required argument isn't passed, it'll fail, and it'll say missing required parameter. So it's just a very useful practical module. Test2 plugin, no warnings. If you are using a modern test simple distribution that includes test more and so on, you're using test2. When you run a unit test, all the tests could pass, but your code may emit warnings, and the file is still considered as a passing test file. If you use this plugin, if the tests emit any warnings at all, it's an automatic failure. And I think that's pretty helpful because generally you don't want your code to emit warnings. Import box. This is a really nice module for importing subroutines into a sub namespace. So we've all used data dumper, and it exports the dumper routine. Well, in this case, I can use import box to import it to a sub namespace called DD. So it doesn't pollute my main namespace. And thereafter, I can then call the dumper function by referencing the DD sub namespace. It also has a really cool object-oriented interface too. So if you're importing lots of things, I think this is a really nice way to do it. Git object store and Git database. These are 2 new Git modules built on top of Git raw. They're at a higher level, so they're more pleasant to interact with than Git raw, which is very low level. They both work in completely different ways, and I haven't used them, but they look good, and if you're working programmatically with Git, I would start there. Okay, hardware. Amazon Dash button, I have one of these. It looks like this. So what Amazon wants you to do is when you press this button, it will connect to a pre-configured Wi-Fi network and send a message into the cloud and run some code on a Lambda function. Well, you can use Amazon Dash button to execute some arbitrary Perl code on your machine. And basically, you start the script running, it will listen for the button press, and then when it detects it, it will execute whatever code you want. The only caveat is that both machines must be on the same network. Thank you. Okay, wiring Pi API. Steve Bertrand has done a huge amount of work in the Raspberry Pi space, like 20-something odd modules this year. This one gives you access to the GPIO board, peripheral devices, that kind of thing. So it's an essential low-level module. After he released that, he released Raspberry Pi SPI, which is Serial Peripherals Interface, lets you connect to other devices. DHT, that's a thermometer. And LCD, which lets you control LCD screens. I didn't pick these at random because if you have all those and you have a Raspberry Pi, you have everything you need to run your own grow room. But before you rush to code up your own solution, Steve has anticipated that. He released App RPI env UI, which is a single-page web app that does that for you. Okay, other. I'm going to skip through these because I'm running out of time, but Graphics Raylib is a wrapper for a C game programming library. I've used it. It's a lot of fun. It compiles to many different platforms. Color Brewer is a web app released by Cynthia Brewer that has these beautiful color hues. You can use Color Brewer, the module, to extract these beautiful color sets and use them for whatever you want. Okay, web. Data Mu Form. This is, if you've ever used HTML Form Handler or one of those, this is a new spin on that. So if you're doing form processing, I think this looks like a promising start. LWP User Agent Tor is really cool. Lets you use a user agent over Tor. It's very simple to use. And there's a dub mechanized version as well. Weasel, this is a port of a PHP library called Mink. It is like a meta wrapper for web drivers like Selenium and so on. And it has a plugin system that you can use to extend it to support any WebDriver library that you want. I think that's a mink, or it might be a weasel. Okay, I'm almost out of time. I've just got a couple more slides. DDG is the open source component of DuckDuckGo's search engine, and AppDuckPan is the kind of installation software they use to download and install all of that locally on your machine. It's really cool because once you've got all that stuff, you can run your local version of DuckDuckGo. They have a whole plugin system. You can write your own plugins. They're a very friendly community, and they're very Perl friendly too. So check that out if that's something that interests you. NetWebSocket implements WebSockets in Perl. These are two ports of JavaScript templating libraries that look good. Okay, Lemplate. Lemplate isn't a templating library per se. It takes Template Toolkit templates and translates them into Lua modules, which I think is brilliant. Worm, this is the final one. This is a new web framework that implements a web framework as a kind of functional right folding, using a functional right fold algorithm. The documentation is hilarious. It's worth looking this up just to read the documentation alone. And that's it. Thank you. So I did run over.